It's time for Image in the 90s. And we're talking about WildCats' #1 covert action team. When I was a kid, I thought this shit was the coolest stuff on the racks. Looking at it as an adult, the first thing I think of is, what the fuck is a covert action team? Doesn't make sense. That being said, loved this comic book. I loved the comic book at first. Then Alan Moore came in and did some stuff. I've never really gotten into that, but I have all those issues, so I'm excited to dive in and unpack those at some point. But then I got back into the title when Joe Casey came on for Volume 2 after Scott Lobdell did like 6 issues or something, and I just fell in love with that title. Went back, made sure I had all my original issues, tried to start piecing together collections, and then WildCats 3.0 was next level shit back in the day. But how did it all start? How did it all start? It all started with a book co-created by Jim Lee and Brandon Choi, written and penciled by Jim Lee, written by Brandon Choi, who Ed from Cartoonist Kayfabe always says is the luckiest man in comics. Then we got inking by Scott Williams, lettering by Mike Heisler, coloring by Joe Rosas, and edited by Ruth Grice. Color separator, Digital Chameleon. So it starts off with this weird kind of flashback. We get introduced to Void and some kind of timey-wimey thing. There is some weird shit going on here in this book where it starts out and it says it's in the past. Then it says it's in the future. And this is introducing Lynch, who is going to be the leader of like Gen 13, part of like Team 7 and all that shit, right? And then it cuts to the present, okay? And the present is 1990, and we meet Jacob Marlowe, and he's just a bum, homeless guy, laying out there drunk, sleeping in alleyways. Some dudes come to give him some shit, kick his ass, because that's what you did back in the day. Maybe they were trying to film some tape for Bum Fighting Volume 25 or some shit. But he is saved by Void, who says, "You are, Lord Imp, very important to what is going to happen for the future of this world." And then it cuts to today, 1992. What? Hold on. Rewind. Rewind. So we start in the past. We go to the future. We go to the present, which is 1990. Then we go to today, which is 1992. Okay, whatever. So Void shows up. She takes Jacob, says, "You have a destiny to fulfill." And then we cut to the present. Bam. There's the present. He's still awakening in the alley from a long night, but they clean him up. He is now the CEO of the Marlowe Corporation, Foundation, whatever it is. Void's telling him all this cryptic-ass shit. This whole book is filled with cryptic-ass shit, y'all. It really is. I don't know how this works as a first issue. I don't know if it really does. But it does introduce all of the characters. And it vaguely introduces the concepts. But it's not really clear. And I think when I was a kid, I remember loving this book and loving the artwork. And I still do. But I was rather confused. Still today, reading this as a first issue, I know what's coming up. I know this war about the Daemonites and the Cherubim, and I know about the Coda. You don't know any of that shit here. You don't even know how Maul's powers work. They just assume that you fucking do. I guess they assume, like Kayfabe says, that you read all the Wizard articles or whatever. So Jacob is running this corporation, which is running this team. And Void is the heart of this. She's a teleporter. We're going to find out more about her, but she's had this vision where she is destroyed and ended, and they have to find these special chosen ones or some shit. So they have been assembling a team to fight this war that we don't even really get introduced to. Great double-page splash here. We're introduced to Spartan, Warblade, and Maul on this page. So efficient in introducing characters, completely lacking in introducing concept. Then we switch to the villains, the Cabal. This dude, Pike, has a mask just like Grifter. Will that be important? I don't know. But I thought that the leader of the Cabal was the coolest fucking dude out there, had a cool design, a great action figure. His name is Hellspont, and that is one of my favorite Jim Lee designs for a villain. I fucking love it. I still today look at this and I love it. Turns out they have a mole in the government, which is going to help them win. Like, it is, like, I'm telling y'all, it is incredibly vague as shit about what is actually going on in this first issue. But you got these bad guys called the Cabal, and to show that they're bad, they kill this dude who is apparently a mole for Jacob Marlowe. Then we get this interesting... What did I... Oh, there. The next page, we get introduced to... Well, there's this concept that Jacob's kind of making these deals with these other organizations. It's, like I said, it's very unclear. But then we get the introduction of Grifter. Grifter is from another faction who is trying to hunt down these special gifted ones or some shit. So this search leads him to a strip club where we get a nice centerfold spread out of Voodoo. So we're now introduced to Voodoo, who is on stage performing, and these other people show up. One of them is this tall Amazonian-type woman that's where we start learning about the coda and all that kind of shit. So they're in there to find Voodoo because she is like some kind of special powered chosen one or something. So they interrupt her performance. They're not sex positive. And she can see that they're monsters. And a fight breaks out, and Grifter puts on his mask, and now Cole Cash is Grifter, and it's time to get into some badass artwork. Right there, Grifter doing his best John Woo, as Jim Ruggs said, and he's just blowing people away. We got an appearance from the news lady from Spawn, who appeared in a lot of these Image books back in the day. But Grifter's just tearing people apart, blowing people away. Great action sequence here in the middle of the strip club. Voodoo doesn't know what's going on. Grifter's there to save her. And then in come the WildCATs. The WildCATs pinpoint her location. So all three factions, you got Grifter acting independently but in concert with someone else. You got the Jacob Marlowe and the WildCATs, and you got the Cabal sending these people. Or is it the Coda? What's going on here? We don't really know. This is the moment where we really get introduced to Maul and his powers, where they tell him to change his mask, but we don't quite get what's going on yet. But you get some cool artwork there, let's be honest, right? So the fight continues. This dude winds up getting Jacob Marlowe, putting a gun to his head. Grifter's got him in his sights, but a blade comes in and shanks. Then another centerfold spread with the introduction of Zealot. This might be my favorite piece of art in this entire book. I had a huge crush on Zealot when I was a kid, and I think I still do. She is introduced to Jacob Marlowe. The villains are defeated, but Void has a strange warning. Something is coming up, and then the building they're in explodes. And then we get this final bit where Hellspawn is talking to their mole in the U.S. government, and it is no other than Dan Quayle, Vice President of the United States at the time. So overall, it's an okay issue. It's got some solid artwork. Jim Lee is trying to do some stuff. The coloring's pretty dope. Not to keep repeating over what Cartoonist Kayfabe already said, but it's on non-coated paper. It's colored very well. It's paced out decently enough, but there is a lot of ground trying to be covered here, and they really skip ahead very quickly. They linger on certain aspects, like this weird time jump back and forth in the beginning for no real reason, when there could have been a better way to introduce this as a first issue, and it even does utilize more pages than the typical first issue would at that time. But it's got some great moments of Jim Lee artwork. It's got some really confusing storytelling, but the dialogue I didn't find to be too bad. I was really worried that the dialogue by Brandon Choi would be really stunted and stiff, but it doesn't work that bad. And he was going to school for politics and history, and he wound up going to law school, and you can tell that he's kind of got this more like verbose kind of approach. They were definitely trying to mimic a little bit of Chris Claremont-ism. I even heard that they were trying to mimic Tom Orzechowski lettering here. But it is anchored by some really solid artwork for its time, but it's not as dynamic as it could be because each page has to have so much put in because they're really trying to tell this so fast. I think WildCATs could have benefited from some decompressed storytelling, especially with Jim Lee on the artwork, but that was just not what was done at the time. You had to introduce everything, all the elements in the first issue, so it does do it. It does get it in. It's got some nice pieces of artwork, but overall, it's not been as strong as the first issue of Savage Dragon. It's not as strong to me as the first issue of Spawn, because Spawn was decompressed. It's like the ultimate decompressed story. You get like a tick of a story in Spawn, but you do get introduced to the concept in Spawn and in here. And you got some great payoffs, some great setups, and some great payoffs. Knowing the history of the Wildcats, it reads a little bit better. But if you didn't know anything, how would you know what the hell was going on? Altogether, Wildcats number 1 is a fun revisit, and I'm excited to, not too far from now, revisit issue number 2, and we just may find our way through every issue of Wildcats here on Image. In the 90s.